Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Japandroids called Near to the Wild Heart of Life. So here's a confession about me. I didn't really cut loose or run wild in high school. I know, totally shocking, but the truth is that for as much as I was dipping my toes into metal and anarchist philosophy in the mid-2000s growing up, I wasn't really much of a wild kid. A big part of that was sports. I was huge into track and field, and I basically managed to drag all of my D&D group along with me onto the team. A big part of that was my own academic ambitions. And I went to study at a university out of province, study physics of all things. I needed high grades, and if you couldn't tell by the previous D&D reference, I'm a huge nerd. Coupled with the fact that I went to a private Catholic school with a graduating class of less than 40 kids that was really too small for many cliques, I was involved in the debating team and a bit of musical theater, and really my parents gave me a considerable leash to prove my responsibility, which included access to a vehicle. I didn't really have much of a drive to rebel that hard outside of a few too many car accidents. Look, the reason I am saying all this is that despite liking a lot of the pop-punk explosion in the mid-2000s, it wasn't really the soundtrack of my teenage angst and adolescence. Most because I wasn't really an angsty kid growing up. Hell, most of my sullen misanthropic phase was in my second year of university, and the soundtrack to that was mostly top 40 club hits. It was a weird phase, let me just say that. But it also can make for a fascinating listening experience going back to acts like, say, Japandroids, a Canadian punk duo who dropped their debut album Post Nothing in 2009, full of scuzzed out guitar work and anthemic crunch that made their material kind of natural for unsettled teenage emotion, complete with a sharper writing that really made them a critical darling nearly immediately. And when they followed it up with the even catchier and sharper Celebration Rock, which took much of the lo-fi sound and refined it into more incisive, reckless exuberance, it looked like Japandroids could go in any direction and still connect with their audience with remarkable power. And yet, 5 years later, what did they deliver with Near to the Wild Heart of Life, their newest album? Well, okay. So do you ever have one of those cases where you can look at something and without even thinking, you acknowledge that it's good, but you know almost exactly how you could make it better? It's not something that requires a lot of incredible analysis or a deep dive into sonic textures or little intricacies. You just get it in your gut? Well, that's exactly how I felt when I was listening to this Japandroids record, which, yes, is an expansion of their sound into cleaner, more expansive territory, but at its core, still maintains a lot of the same pathos. It's definitely good, for sure, and longtime fans are gonna really like and appreciate it. But you know what? After the third or fourth listen, hell, not even that long, I had the sinking feeling that this could have been great, and it really wouldn't even be that hard to get to that point. So for a change of pace, let's start off with the lyrics, where arguably the least has changed. This is still very much stories of wild romance, hard drinking, traveling, and scattershot musings about no clear sense of place and fleeting times. Not the first time the Frank Turner parallel showed up, I should add. And like always, you're not really getting a grand story so much as snapshots into a wild life story and the steps taken to change it, with the opening title track showing how our frontman Brian King found the courage to chase dreams and move across Canada to Toronto, with the following song seeming to yank the audience on a whirlwind tour soaked in alcohol and filled with women who flit into their lives for moments before they just have to carry on. And you know, while I will always appreciate when Canadian artists actually shout out Canadian cities and locations the same way they do American locations so often, and I really do love how on the bridge of the closing song, In a Body Like a Grave, it yearns to dive back into that fray nowadays, something about the writing just doesn't feel as desperate. Now, part of that is to be expected. Hell, it almost seems like the band admits it. They've grown up a little bit. And between the lines, you can start to see that age is starting to wear on them a bit. But at the same time, the writing isn't picking up the complexity that you would expect when some of that recklessness gets tempered. The biggest example is the 7-minute behemoth of a song, Ark of Bar, which wears its worship for sympathy for the devil by the Rolling Stones very plainly, and one of the many allusions to New Orleans, where the album was recorded. But beyond tapping into some very feverish imagery about CD bars and Southern fried religion, and some great lines and metaphors about mosquitoes, the song doesn't really coalesce and come together beyond more of an impressionist take. But indeed, I'd say that about a fair amount of the instrumentation and a lot of the production too, which is opting for a larger, more expansive, more diverse sound, but doesn't seem to go far enough to decisively add a lot of flavor. Or to put it another way, Ark of Bar might be set in New Orleans, but it's not like we're getting something from Tom Waits or something analogous to what Mark Cohn did on Walking in Memphis for the titular town. For Japandroids venturing into adding synths or even a bass guitar, it seems to be a very calculated affair. And on a song like Arca Bar, it makes the buzzy, fragmented additions not really quite gel with the far more decisive and rock-solid guitar and drums formula. And that is important to emphasize, because at its core, Japandroids are still delivering some blisteringly fast and energetic rock music, with scuzzy textures anchoring the low end, strong hooks, and some impressively explosive drum work. Really great work there. But for as good as this core formula is, there's something about every step away from it that feels kind of painfully calculated, and not particularly well mixed either, especially in the too clean by half backing vocals all over the place. I actually don't mind that cleaner acoustic line that anchors northeast southwest. Again, there's enough between it and beneath it to give it something of a modern Frank Turner vibe, which yes, I like. But if you go into songs like True Love and A Free Life of Free Will, that seems to push that balance to its breaking point between cleaner tones and a lot of vocal fuzz, or the oddly muddy drum production of No Known Drink or Drug that seems to break into a hook that's really too conventional to fit with the rest of the song, you kind of get the feeling that Japandroids are trying to fuse the best of their old style with new flourishes, and they both kind of feel a little compromised. And you know, that's not counting I'm Sorry for Not Finding You Sooner, which drowns the vocals even further and seems to simmer in flat waves of fuzz, and more than ever just feels kind of lyrically undercooked. And that's another thing. There are some songs that on a compositional level just feel a little unfinished or underserved, like No Known Drink or Drug, or True Love and A Free Life of Free Will, or even parts of the jangling Midnight to Morning that I otherwise like, but could have been improved with a little bit more reckless exuberance, either coming in the writing or especially in a lot of the composition to match all the drum work. And nowhere is that more apparent than in Brian King's vocals. Now, we'll put aside the occasionally jarring backing vocals that feel too clean to match well with King's delivery. I already talked about that. And it's more of a production issue and more evidence that the former mixer of the National, Peter Kaitis, might be a tad too reserved for Japandroids in this style. But a larger issue is that King often feels too reserved for his own songs, and not just in the feeling that the raw grit seems to have been sanded away and polished off his delivery, only to be fixed in post through lo-fi vocal pickups, but also that there are hooks where he just kind of underplays instead of getting as wild or powerful as he could. And sure, maybe some of that comes with age and looking to play with a little bit more reserve to match a lot of his instrumentals. But that's the thing. With the aggressive tempos and especially the drum work, Japandroids are still sticking to that formula that would demand a singer who goes a little harder, or at least is willing to howl a little bit more. Whereas here, the earnestness and the solid vocal melodies and the really irresistible hooks, that carries through a lot, but I'm convinced that a few more moments could hit a lot harder than they do. They got some good songs, but they really could be great songs. But look, as a whole, I like this. Again, I don't love it. I wish King had pushed a little harder. I wish the band had found a way to marry the more expansive gloss with their solid core a little better. I wish the lyrics tapped into that recklessness with a little bit more purpose, or brought the insight to anchor more of that maturity and that slower tempo. But again, for a record that feels so transitional as this one does, I'm not exactly surprised here either. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to discount how catchy, energetic, and genuinely fun this was for me. So it's getting a light 7 out of 10 and a recommendation, especially for Japandroids fans who've been waiting a real long time for this. I don't promise you'll like this more than Post Nothing or especially Celebration Rock. I certainly don't. But it is an intriguing step to wherever this band is going next, and you know what? I think I'm along for the ride. For now, at least. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the link down in the description below if you want to buy the record. If you guys got more thoughts, the poll is right over there in the corner. I'm really curious how Japandroids fans are viewing this album. I think some people are going to absolutely love it, but I can see a lot of fans kind of recoiling for some of the cleaner spots. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote, and once a week, on Saturdays, you guys get to add records directly to my schedule, or possibly even movies in the highest level. Now, there's more details if you want to get there, but if you want to ensure that an album gets on my schedule, that's the way to do it. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.